Hello, Namaskar. This is Firstpost and you're watching Vantage with me, Palki Sharma. It is election season in India. Today, phase 3 of the voting was held. We'll tell you about what's at stake. But our lead story tonight is a vote of confidence from corporate America. They're bullish on India. From Warren Buffett to Jamie Dimon, some of the biggest names are vouching for the India growth story. So there's reason to celebrate, but without losing sight of the challenges ahead. We'll discuss both on the show tonight. Meanwhile, no ceasefire in Gaza. Hamas has accepted it. Israel has rejected it. We'll tell you why. In Moscow, another grand inauguration for President Putin. We look at his legacy as Russia's leader and his influence on world affairs. In Europe, a first-of-its-kind deployment since the Second World War, German troops will be stationed in Lithuania. In the US, Donald Trump is pushing his luck in the hush money trial. Will he end up in the White House or in jail? In Australia, condemnation for China after a PLA jet fired flares at an Australian chopper in a dangerous encounter. In Brazil, a state of emergency after floods. In the Maldives, an appeal for India. Please send tourists to Mali. How should New Delhi read this? And Tesla has sparked outrage over its latest round of layoffs for the way they were done. We'll discuss if there is a nice way to fire an employee and why don't companies do it. All this and more coming up. The headlines first. Hezbollah says it has attacked northern Israel with explosive-laden drones. This comes just a day after the Iran-backed group killed 2 Israeli soldiers there. Tensions between Israel and Hezbollah have escalated since Israel began its Gaza offensive. The United Kingdom says its defense ministry was targeted in a cyber attack. The data breach involves names and banking details of the armed forces. Officials suspect China to be behind the attack. In March, the Sunak government had accused Beijing of targeting email accounts of lawmakers. In India, no relief for Delhi Chief Minister Arvind Kejriwal. The Supreme Court defers its order on his interim bail plea. The court said bail will only be granted if Kejriwal agrees to not carry out any official duties. In March, the Delhi Chief Minister was arrested in a money laundering case. Nepal's ruling coalition party splits. Several lawmakers from the Janata Samajwadi Party Nepal apply for a new party. The party's chair, the Deputy Prime Minister, is on a trip abroad. Insiders say this move has been orchestrated by the Prime Minister to counter his deputy. And at least 6 people killed after a building collapses in South Africa. Dozens still trapped and more than 50 people are missing. 75 crew members were at the site when the under-construction 5-story building collapsed. Let me start with some questions. Are you an investor? What do you look for in a potential investment? Most investors follow a checklist. They want their money to be safe and they want it to grow. That's the whole point of investment, getting returns. Now, there are some investments which guarantee returns, and corporate America believes that India is part of that list, the destination to get some big returns. So they're turning to Indian companies and Indian stocks. In other words, they're bullish on India. Take Warren Buffett, for example. He's a billionaire investor. A few days back, he met his shareholders at the annual meeting of his company, Berkshire Hathaway. It is one of America's richest companies, sitting on a cash pile of $189 billion. So Warren Buffett was asked if his company would put some of this money in India, and he said it could be a good idea. In fact, let me quote from his response. There may be an unexplored or unattended opportunity, but that may be something in the future. That is something a more energetic management at Berkshire could pursue.
Obviously, India, I'm sure there are loads of opportunities in a place like India. There may be an unexplored or unattended to opportunity in that area. I'm not the one to do it. But that may be something that in the future.
Buffett is 93 years old now. He is optimistic about India, but he wants future leaders to pursue opportunities here. Basically, he's sticking to his core values of patience and long-term investing. There are others who want to move faster. Like Jamie Dimon, the CEO of JPMorgan, he's been constantly talking about India and its potential. A few weeks ago, he praised Prime Minister Modi and his development initiatives. Last year, he spoke about Indian markets and the optimism around them. Dimon feels the positive sentiment is completely justified. Again, I have a quote. It's not just because of the complications with China. I think that's an opportunity, but some of this optimism would have been there anyway. And this statement is revealing because it gives an insight into the thinking of corporate America. What fuels their optimism about India? The most obvious factor is China and its economic decline, which is a well-documented fact now. China's economic policies have caused huge losses to investors. Let me show you data from January this year. Chinese stock markets have wiped out some $6 trillion in 3 years. That's double Britain's annual economic output, $6 trillion wiped out. Needless to say, no investor likes to lose their money. So for better returns, they have turned to India. And there's more data to support this shift. In the past 7 odd years, Indian equities have delivered a return of more than 10%, about 8 out of 10 times, with no recorded losses. So Indian markets are performing better than China. But like Dimon pointed out, that's not the only factor. Corporate America has more than one reason to like India. They're also drawn by the high domestic demand and large infrastructure investments in India. So Wall Street is looking at India from a long-term perspective. In February, Bank of America released a survey. They spoke to more than 200 fund managers in the US, and together they manage over $600 billion in assets, these fund managers, $600 billion. They were asked which countries they're bullish about. 19% of the fund managers said they prefer India. They also said they're avoiding countries like China and Thailand. So there is a positive sentiment around India. That's a good thing. Now, India will have to find a way to keep this confidence, to ensure that this bull run lasts for a long time. And the key to that would be economic growth. From 2014 to 2023, India's GDP grew by 55%. New Delhi's challenge would be to maintain this momentum. And for that, it will have to plug a few gaps, like domestic consumption. It needs a boost. Look at the private consumption expenditure. This is the measure of the money people spend on buying things. In the last financial year, the spending grew at just 3%. That's the slowest pace in 20 years. Then there is a job problem. More people are entering the workforce every year in India, but there are fewer jobs to go around. 83% of jobless Indians today are the youth. Even more worrying is the skills gap. Let me show you this latest report. India has less than 2,000 senior engineers who are skilled enough to develop core AI products. So investing in promising sectors would also be key. India's long-term outlook remains unchanged. Experts say India will remain among the world's fastest-growing economies. This is what draws foreign investors to India. It's a win worth celebrating, but without losing sight of the challenges ahead. It's been a crazy 24 hours in Gaza, a roller coaster of emotions. First despair, then joy, and then despair again. All of it over a ceasefire. On Monday, a deal looked very unlikely. Hamas was not budging on its demands, and Israel was set on attacking Rafah. But late in the day, some positive news trickled in. Hamas had agreed to a ceasefire. Now, just to be clear, this agreement did not come from Israel. It was drafted by Qatar and Egypt. After a lot of back and forth, Hamas agreed to it. And soon celebrations broke out in Rafah. Gazans thought the war was over.
الحمد لله حمد الشاكرين الحمد لله حمد الصابرين.
Hope is a fickle thing, especially in conflict zones like Gaza, and pretty soon it was clear why. Israel's hard-right ministers rejected the ceasefire, so did Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. He said the deal did not meet Israel's demands, so the military operation will go on.
בוחנים We examine every answer and response in the most serious manner and are exhausting every possibility regarding negotiations and returning the hostages to their homes as soon as possible as a main mission. In parallel, we are still operating in the Gaza Strip and will continue to do so.
So the war continues. Israeli soldiers have moved into Rafah. You can see their tanks at the checkpost between Gaza and Egypt. Now this checkpoint is very important again. A lot of aid enters through here. Plus many Gazans fled to Egypt via this point. Now Israel has occupied it. They've surrounded Rafah from both sides. And the bombing continues. Israeli missiles hit Rafah overnight. They killed around 20 Palestinian civilians. I know all of this may sound confusing. A lot of deals, attacks and U-turns. So let's focus on four major questions here. What was the ceasefire deal? Why did Israel reject it? Why did Hamas accept it? And what happens next? First of all, the ceasefire deal. Reports say it had three major phases. In the first phase, Israel would leave the heavily populated areas of Gaza. Hamas would then release hostages, around 33 of them, all women and children. In return, Israel would release Palestinian prisoners. How many? 30 for each Israeli hostage. That's phase one. In phase two, Israel would fully withdraw from Gaza. In return, Hamas would free captive soldiers. And finally, phase three, exchange of all remaining captives or their remains. Also, a reconstruction plan for Gaza. This was the ceasefire deal proposed by Qatar and Egypt, the one that Hamas accepted. Each of these phases would last 6 weeks. So the whole plan would have taken around 5 months, which brings us to the second question. Why did Israel reject it? Well, from the looks of it, Netanyahu was caught off guard. He did not expect Hamas to agree. Just look at the events leading up to it. Israel dropped pamphlets in Rafah. They asked the civilians to evacuate the city. Plus, the sentiment in Qatar and Egypt was not positive. Neither side expected a breakthrough, which is why Israel's response is half-baked. Yes, Netanyahu has rejected the deal, but he also said that negotiations will continue. Now to question 3. Why did Hamas accept the ceasefire? Honestly, they did not have an option. Hamas may not care about Gazan civilians, but they do care about their fighters. Israel says there are between 5,000 and 8,000 Hamas fighters in Rafah. If Israel invades, many of them would die. Maybe that's why Hamas agreed. Also, it puts the pressure back on Israel. Hamas can go and tell the world, we agreed to a ceasefire, yet Israel attacked us. So don't blame us for the destruction. Blame Israel. In fact, a Hamas official said exactly that. He said the ball is in Israel's court. Which brings us to the final question. What happens next? Netanyahu is under a lot of pressure, both at home and abroad. Let me show you pictures from Tel Aviv. Israeli protesters blocked a major highway there. They want Prime Minister Netanyahu to take the deal to bring the hostages home.
From the Israeli government to take this deal to save all the remaining hostages who are still alive. Save lives. Don't talk about fighting and blood.
Same with Israel's allies. The US says it is reviewing the ceasefire deal, but its overall position remains the same. A deal is better than war.
We continue to believe that the hostage deal is the best way to avoid that sort of an outcome while securing the release of those hostages.
In spite of this warning and these requests, the attack started yesterday night. I am afraid that this is going to cause again a lot of casualties, civilian casualties, whatever they say.
So once again, all eyes are on Netanyahu. His military is poised to strike Rafah. The evacuation order has been given. The border crossing has been occupied and the bombings continue. It's now a question of sending soldiers in. Will Netanyahu give that order? He's got a lot of factors to consider. His right-wing allies want him to ignore Hamas, to go ahead with the offensive. The families of hostages want the opposite. They say, take the deal. His allies abroad are saying the same. But what if he takes the deal and Hamas was bluffing? What if most of the hostages are already dead? Then it would be counterproductive. Netanyahu would be the leader who was duped by Hamas, not once but twice. So there are no easy choices here because security, legacy and lives are at stake. We'll be tracking Israel's actions very closely. That walk is quite famous. You may have seen reels or TikToks of it. Vladimir Putin first made that walk in the year 2000. He took charge as president of Russia. Today, he made the same walk again. Through the narrow staircase, through the gilded corridor, and a line of oligarchs and government officials. It's not just a presidential inauguration, it is a statement of authority. It's Putin's way of saying, I am the boss. He's begun his 5th term as the Russian president. It's a 6-year term, so Putin will be in office until 2030. Only one person has ruled Russia longer than him, and that's Joseph Stalin. But this term is unlike his previous ones because Russia is now at war. So all eyes were on his inaugural address. What message would Putin send to the West? He said he's ready for dialogue, but only as equals.
The dialogue, including on issues of security and strategic stability, is possible, but not from a position of force. Without any arrogance, snobbishness, feeling of one's own exclusiveness, but only as equals, respecting each other's interests. Together with our partners in Eurasian integration, with other sovereign centers of development, we will continue to work on forming a multipolar world order, an equal and indivisible security system.
Putin is more confident now. The tide of the war is turning and Western resolve is weakening. But we are not just focusing on the Ukraine war. We're looking at Putin's overall legacy. He's ruled Russia for nearly a quarter of a century, sometimes as prime minister, sometimes as president. So when the history books are written, how will he be remembered? As a villain, as the West calls him, or a hero of Russia? I'm afraid the answer is not so black and white. There are 3 indisputable facts about Putin's rule, things that will shape his legacy. Number 1, he put Russia back on the map. After the Cold War, no one expected this. Russia's economy and society were broken. In 1998, they defaulted on their debt, meaning they did not have money to pay back their loans. And politically, Moscow was rudderless. Most people assumed that NATO would swallow up Russia, that a great power would become a Western ally, much like Britain or Germany. But Putin had other plans. He did not antagonize the West. Instead, he used the West to stabilize Russia's economy. He sold gas and oil to Europe. He got investments from the US and expanded relations in Asia and Africa. As Russia grew, Putin became more confident. He started defying the West. In 2008, he fought a war against Georgia. Back then, Georgia was eyeing a NATO membership. In 2014, he attacked another NATO candidate, Ukraine. He managed to snatch Crimea away from them. And in 2022, he attacked Ukraine again. With all these moves, Putin's goal was the same, to tell the West, I'm not a pushover. Another example is that of Syria. In 2015, he decided to support Syrian President Bashar al-Assad in the civil war. Again, it was a timely move. Assad now has the upper hand in Syria, and Putin has a reliable ally in West Asia. Factor number 2, democratic backsliding. It's an undeniable legacy of Putin's. In the year 2000, he won the election with 53% of the votes. This year, he got 87% of the votes, and no one is buying it. His rivals end up persecuted or dead, and his critics end up jailed or poisoned. The situation is very different from what Putin described in 2000. Back then, he said Russia was a modern democratic state. Today, Russia is modern, but hardly anyone would call it democratic. And finally, the third factor, realigning Russia's destiny. Around 75% of Russia's territory is located in Asia. Yet, Moscow was always looking west, towards Europe. Whether it was culture, trade, alliances, or even political threats, Russia was always obsessed with Europe. But Vladimir Putin changed that. He has built a close partnership with China. He's cemented relations with India, and he's also made inroads into West Asia. Today, Russia's biggest markets and partners are in the East. Meanwhile, the West is enemy number one. I know stranger things have happened, but after the events of the last decade, it's hard to see Russia back in the Western fold. Chances are that chapter is closed, which brings us to Putin's future. He's 71 years old. He will be 77 by the time his term ends. And legally, he can run again. Putin is a great example of leaders making a difference. But honestly, that's also a problem for Russia. Will Putin's successor be as feisty as him? Will he or she be able to hold the country together like Putin has? Or will Russia's ambitions disappear with Vladimir Putin? Perhaps questions for another time. But in conclusion, let me say this. Putin will probably be remembered as one of the most influential figures of this century. Controversial and ruthless, yes, but also influential. And here's the latest example of how Putin is influencing his neighborhood. This is a story from Lithuania, a country in northeastern Europe, in the Baltic region. It is home to less than 3 million people, and it is one of the 3 Baltic countries, the other 2 being Latvia and Estonia. These 3 Baltic nations are located at a critical junction. They lie at Russia's border. When Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022, the Baltic nations were scared. They feared that they could be next. So they've been clamoring for protection. All 3 are already NATO members. They joined the alliance in 2004, but their proximity to Russia makes them wary. They want support from the other NATO member countries. And not just in terms of weapons. Lithuania has gone one step further. It wants a permanent troop presence, soldiers to bolster its armed forces. And one NATO member in particular has been keen to help.
Germany is firmly on the side of the Baltic states, and there are many reasons for this. But it is very important that we make it very clear this is a serious commitment.
German Chancellor Olaf Scholz was in Lithuania yesterday. He was observing a NATO military exercise, the Grand Quadriga. It's a NATO drill being held in Lithuania, but led by the German military. There was a multinational contingent of troops involved, but some 20-odd German soldiers stand out, not because of their skill, but because of what they represent.
And secondly, we are stationing a brigade in Lithuania. On my journey here this morning, I took another look at the situation in Lithuania and visited our troops there. And this commitment, our commitment, shows how determined Germany, how determined NATO is to defend the alliance against any aggression.
Germany is permanently stationing a brigade in Lithuania. The German troops arrived here last month. It was a milestone. For the first time since the Second World War, Germany is permanently stationing troops in another country. This hasn't happened since the defeat of Hitler and the Nazis. Back in the 1930s and 40s, Nazi troops spread across all of Europe. Lithuania was not spared either. It was occupied between 1941 and 1944. The Nazis were defeated the following year in 1945, but sadly for Lithuania, it did not get freedom. Before the fall of Hitler, Lithuania had already changed hands. It was occupied by the Soviet Union in 1944. So Lithuania became a communist Soviet state and stayed that way till 1990. So for Lithuanians, the memories of Soviet occupation are still fresh. This means Lithuania was always likely to choose Germany over Russia, especially because today Germany is a democracy and a fellow NATO member.
Germany's decision to assign a brigade to Lithuania is an example and testimony of much needed leadership and a firm commitment to collective defense.
Lithuania cannot wait to get more German soldiers. The original plan was for Germany to send about 5,000 people by 2027, soldiers, civilians and their families. But Lithuania does not want to wait another 3 years. The country's president made an urgent plea yesterday. He wants Germany to deploy troops, and I'm quoting, as fast as possible. He said Lithuania does not have the luxury to waste 1 minute. Their Prime Minister also wants more German troops immediately. Her ministers are finalizing the deal, paving the way for more German soldiers.
I think our ministries of defense are on a very good track of finalizing this agreement, and we will be able to sign the relative documents and ratify the documents related to status of German Brigade Lithuania in the parliament this fall.
She expects the deal to get finalized by this autumn. So in the next few months, Lithuania will make arrangements to host 5,000 Germans at a cost of about 800 million euros. It's a steep price, but Lithuania is willing to pay that price for its security. The question is, will it work? Will German troops on its soil actually make Lithuania safer, or will it just serve to anger Russia further? Our next story is from the United States. It's about Donald Trump, the former and possibly next American president. Trump will face Joe Biden again this November. So far, the race is neck and neck. Every month, new opinion polls flip the picture. A new poll came out this Sunday. It says Trump leads among all American adults. He's leading 46 to 44% against Biden. So it's a close race. It could go either way. So Trump should be treading carefully. But that's not his style. Instead, he's making a big play, using all the legal cases against him as ammunition. Donald Trump faces a number of criminal charges, so he's trying to portray himself as a martyr. He's working to discredit the legal proceedings. That's his play. That's politics. But there's a fine line between politics and illegal actions like intimidating witnesses. Is Trump towing the line? Or has he crossed it by defying the judge in his hush money case? Our next report has the details.
Mr. President, how do you think your defense team...
Former US President Donald Trump is mired in legal troubles. He faces multiple criminal cases. One, the hush money case, has reached the courts. It's a relatively minor one, but Trump is never one to let an opportunity pass. He wants to benefit from his legal troubles. Trump is using them to portray himself as a martyr.
They don't have a case. Every legal scholar says they don't have a case. This is just a political witch hunt. It's election interfering. And this is really, truly election interference, and it's a disgrace. It's a disgrace.
That was Trump yesterday. He's clearly making the case a political issue, calling it election interference. Here's a quick primer on the hush money case. Trump is accused of falsifying business records to hide a hush money payment to an adult actor called Stormy Daniels. Trump allegedly had an affair with her, but in 2016 he didn't want her to make that public. So he allegedly bought her silence with $130,000. Trump is accused of falsifying business records to obscure that payment. And even though the trial is still on, Trump is already facing the prospect of jail time.
And then you have the other thing that maybe is even more disgraceful is the gag order, where I have to watch every word I tell you people. You ask me a question, a simple question, I'd like to give it, but I can't talk about it. Because this judge has given me a gag order and said you'll go to jail if you violate it.
Trump isn't allowed to talk about some aspects of the hush money case, specifically the witnesses or the jury. But Trump, being Trump, has been discrediting everyone involved, from the judge to the attorney prosecuting him to the current US President, Joe Biden. Trump wants people to believe that Biden is orchestrating all this, that Biden is using legal attacks instead of fighting Trump fair and square. It's a standard political strategy, projecting yourself as some victim or martyr. Trump's gag order doesn't stop him from discrediting Biden or the judge or the prosecutors. But the red line is witnesses and the jury, because that's when it stops being politics and becomes intimidation. A jury that's afraid of Trump supporters can't objectively do its job. Witnesses who are scared of Trump's social media rants may not give reliable testimonies. It's a clear obstruction of justice. And since Trump has been criticizing witnesses and the jury, he has been getting fined. $1,000 per gag order violation. That's the maximum amount allowed. Trump got his 10th fine yesterday. But the judge knows that $1,000 don't mean much to Trump, so he threatened Trump with jail time. Trump could face up to 30 days in jail for violating his gag order. But can Trump use this to his advantage as well? He has always projected himself as an outsider, challenging the Washington establishment. He's using these legal cases to claim that he's a victim of both politics and even the judiciary. For him and his supporters, it's a David versus Goliath battle. And only in America can a privileged white man and a billionaire portray himself as a victim and still find plenty of takers.
Now let's tell you about a dangerous encounter. It happened on Saturday between the Australian and Chinese Defence Forces. This was a mid-air altercation. It happened in the Yellow Sea. A chopper from the Australian Navy was in the region. It was on a routine patrol mission to enforce UN sanctions on North Korea. You see, Australia supports United Nations sanctions on North Korea. So this mission was aimed at keeping Pyongyang in check. But suddenly, a Chinese warplane appeared out of nowhere. It flew close to the Australian chopper, and then the Chinese jet deployed flares. What are flares? They're like fireworks coming out of a plane. Pilots typically use flares as a defensive measure to protect their aircraft from incoming missiles. So flares are a safety tool. But in this case, China used them as a weapon to provoke or scare off the Australian chopper, which managed to dodge the flares. But this has sparked a diplomatic war now. Canberra has slammed the Chinese military.
On the incident that we have reported on, we have made very strong representations at every level to China about this incident, which we regard as unprofessional and unacceptable.
Unprofessional and unacceptable. That's what Australia is calling China for putting their chopper at risk. Thankfully, no one got hurt, but it could have gone either way. This episode, or incident, as the Australian Prime Minister calls it, has put Anthony Albanese in a tough spot. That's the Australian PM. Since coming to power, he has pursued a détente with Beijing. Albanese inherited a broken relationship with China. His predecessor was Scott Morrison, who took on Beijing publicly. Morrison was the first world leader to demand an investigation into the origins of the Wuhan virus pandemic. He asked China to cooperate in this investigation, and this demand, of course, led to tensions. China responded with a wave of economic curbs. It even detained Australian nationals. Albanese has been trying to reverse that. He came to power 2 years back, and he's been at it since. Last year, he paid a visit to China. He sat down with Xi Jinping. The trip raised hopes for a reset. Australia and China were mending ties. But Beijing's provocations over the weekend could undo a lot of this progress. Albanese says he wants to keep talking to China, but Beijing is a tricky customer, unpredictable and unreliable. It is already blaming Australia for Saturday's incident.
The truth is that the Australian military aircraft, under the banner of implementing the UN Security Council resolutions, deliberately approached China's airspace in a threatening way that jeopardized China's maritime and air security. The Chinese military took necessary measures at the scene as warning, and the relevant operations were legal, compliant, professional, and safe.
Let me simplify that statement for you. China is basically calling Australia a liar. It also says the Australian chopper approached Chinese airspace, and the actions of the Chinese pilot were defensive in nature. That's Beijing's position. It will be tough for Albanese to keep the dialogue going in circumstances like these. Apparently, he plans to raise this issue again in the month of June. That's when the Chinese premier is scheduled to visit Australia. Meanwhile, the Americans have expressed concern about this incident in particular and China in general. The US says the PLA is becoming more aggressive. That's the Chinese military, the People's Liberation Army, PLA. They're becoming more aggressive in the waters surrounding China. And the US forces have been at the receiving end. Last year, a US Air Force plane was flying over the South China Sea. A Chinese fighter jet buzzed the American plane, and they've done the same with Canada. This was in October last year. A Canadian chopper was in the South China Sea. A Chinese jet approached the aircraft and deployed flares. It was a close call. Canada said the chopper could have drowned, but Beijing refuses to change its ways. In fact, it has only expanded such operations, which is both dangerous and reckless. A small misstep could trigger a major conflict. In the past, both the US and Canada have issued statements. They have protested against China's actions, but Beijing is yet to change course. Australia should be aware of this reality and seek a more robust deterrent against China. To Brazil now, where the government has declared an emergency. Southern parts of the country are being ravaged by floods. They've left behind a trail of destruction. The rains have stopped for now, but hundreds of towns remain underwater. More than 85 people have died. Hundreds others are missing. 150,000 people have been displaced. There is no electricity and drinking water is scarce. The state's governor has called it a scene out of a war. But what led to these floods? Experts say it was a dangerous cocktail of climate change and El Nino. Our next report tells you more.
For many in Brazil, it's a tale of horror. It started with heavy rain. Soon, streets turned into gushing rivers. Residents watched the water rise slowly. Soon, the foul rust-colored water entered their homes. Ultimately, they had to take refuge on rooftops until they were rescued.
I was on the top floor of my daughter's house, and I saw death in front of me. It's very sad.
It began with heavy rains in Rio Grande do Sul, a state in the south of Brazil. Soon, the Guaíba River, which flows through the state, burst its banks. On Sunday, the river reached a level of 17.4 feet. That led to widespread flooding. Hundreds of towns are underwater. At least 85 people have died. Hundreds more are missing. 150,000 have been displaced. 800,000 are left without drinking water and electricity. On Sunday, President Lula da Silva arrived in the state. He discussed rescue and reconstruction operations.
We have to rebuild a lot of houses, and in the recovery of the houses, JDR should take into account with the mayors that we can't allow people to rebuild houses in the same place where they fell down. The town hall, the state, and the federal government need to locate safe land so that people can rebuild their houses.
Rescue operations are currently in full swing. Authorities are out on inflatable boats. Helicopters are rescuing people from roofs. Schools have been turned into makeshift shelters. Field hospitals have been set up. 14,000 soldiers are aiding search and rescue missions. Meanwhile, volunteers are working against the clock. All this as concerns grow about supplies of food, water, and other essentials. But the danger is still not over. This week, Brazil has another forecast of heavy rainfall. It could be between 10th to 15th of May. If that happens, the region could be further underwater, and that would impact rescue missions.
The situation is like something out of a horror movie, with people lying on asphalt, mattresses on the ground, and sleeping there with what's left.
But what's causing this flooding? Rio Grande do Sul is no stranger to natural disasters. In fact, this is the fourth such disaster in the state in the last 1 year. The extreme weather this time is a combination of hotter temperatures, high humidity, and strong winds. Many are attributing this to a dangerous cocktail. El Nino effect coupled with climate change. In Brazil, the El Nino effect is not new. It's caused droughts in the north and intense rainfall in the south. But this time, it's out of control, which means extreme weather is becoming more and more common. So Brazil must prepare to deal with more such freak weather in the coming days.
Let's turn to the Maldives now. Their government seems to be having a rethink. After all the anti-India rants, after all the insults, Malé is now appealing to Indian tourists. First, their tour operators reached out. They started organizing roadshows in Indian cities. And now the tourism minister is on the job. Listen to what he said. I'm quoting, "Our people and the government will give a warm welcome to Indian arrivals. As the tourism minister, I want to tell Indians to please be part of the Maldives' tourism. Our economy depends on tourism." How about that? A personal appeal from the tourism minister of the Maldives, which raises two questions. One, what triggered it? And two, is it genuine? The minister answered the first question himself. He said the Maldivian economy depends on tourism. No tourists, no revenue. And Indian tourists are not traveling to the Maldives, not like before. Just look at the data from last year. Between January and April, more than 73,000 Indians visited the Maldives. And this year, just under 44,000. So Indian arrivals are down 42%. China, the UK and Russia have overtaken India. You can thank boycott movements for that. Last year, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi visited Lakshadweep Islands. He also posted pictures of the trip. But some Maldivian ministers insulted the Indian PM. Of course, this triggered a huge backlash in India. Many tourists said they would boycott the Maldives, and looks like they actually are doing it. Hence, Malé's desperation. They've set an ambitious target this year to welcome 2 million foreign tourists. But without India, it will be hard. Which brings us to the second question. Is the appeal genuine? For tourists, maybe. But it's too early to call this a U-turn by the Maldives. They're still looking beyond India. Last week, a Turkish warship visited the Maldives. The ship's commander also met top Maldivian officials, including the defense minister. And don't look at this voyage in isolation. Back in November, President Mohamed Muizzu traveled to Turkey. It was a huge break from tradition. Usually, Maldivian presidents visit India first after taking office, but Muizzu visited Turkey instead. He also bought Turkish drones, the Bayraktar TB2 drones, for $37 million. Again, this was an escalation because India and Turkey do not see eye to eye. The relationship is largely hostile. Yet, Muizzu bought drones from Turkey. Same with China. He visited the country before traveling to India. He also signed a number of deals with them. So don't expect Muizzu's policy to change. This is more of a financial appeal. And how should India see it? So far, New Delhi has been patient with Muizzu. He asked Indian soldiers to leave the Maldives, and India agreed. Muizzu had set a deadline for Indian soldiers to withdraw, May 10th, the deadline, which is this Friday. Around half of the soldiers have already been pulled out. The rest will follow soon. So India has shown a lot of goodwill. No criticism, no outbursts. The response from New Delhi has been measured. But has that measured response swayed Muizzu? Doesn't look like it has. India out was a campaign pitch for Mohamed Muizzu, a pitch that worked not once but twice. The Maldives held parliamentary elections last month. Muizzu's party swept the country. They ended up with a supermajority in parliament. So why would he abandon a winning strategy? Why would the president do it? Logic says he won't. But politics is a tricky business. You campaign in poetry, but you govern in prose. And that's what Muizzu is doing. He talks about decoupling with India, but he knows it will be tough. It will take time. He wants to do it with minimal blowback. Hence these appeals and softening rhetoric. In fact, the Maldivian foreign minister is visiting India this week. He will meet India's External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar. It's actually the first high-level visit since Muizzu took charge. The foreign minister will be arriving on May 9th. So just one day before Muizzu's deadline expires. And this visit should give us an idea about what lies ahead. More hostility or a working relationship? In India, it's election season. Today was the third phase of voting. 4 more remain. A lot was at stake in this phase. One, most of the states that went to polls are ruled by the BJP, so it was crucial for the ruling party. And two, Prime Minister Modi's home state, Gujarat, went to polls. The Indian Prime Minister himself voted today. He urged more people to come out and cast their vote. And three, some key seats were up for grabs, especially in the states of Karnataka, Gujarat and Uttar Pradesh. So all in all, it was an important phase. By the end of voting today, the fate of over half of all parliament seats had been sealed. Our next report tells you more.
Today was another voting day in India. Millions queued outside polling booths exercising their democratic right. One of them was Prime Minister Narendra Modi. He voted at a school in Ahmedabad. He arrived there at around 7:30 a.m. He cast his vote, greeted the crowd outside and urged citizens to come out and vote.
तीसरे चरण का मतदान है. हमारे देश में दान का एक महात्म्य है और उसी भाव से देशवासी ज्यादा से ज्यादा मतदान करें. आज तीसरे चरण का मतदान है. अभी और करीब 3 सप्ताह चुनाव अभियान चलेगा. 4 मतदान के दौर आगे भी है.
This was the third phase of voting in India. Why does this phase matter? First, let's take a look at the states that voted. 11 states and union territories were part of this phase. Among them was Gujarat, Prime Minister Modi's home state. More than 1,300 candidates contested in these polls. Voting happened in 93 constituencies. In 2019, the BJP-led NDA alliance won 80 of these 93 seats. Most of these states are controlled by the ruling party, so this was an important phase for them. Which brings us to some of the key constituencies. One of them was Gandhinagar in Gujarat. It's crucial to the BJP. It's one of its strongest bastions. It's been represented by party stalwarts like Atal Bihari Vajpayee and L.K. Advani. In 2019, Home Minister Amit Shah fought from the seat. He won by a margin of 500,000 votes. So this time, he's looking to continue the winning streak and return to power with a bigger mandate. Other crucial constituencies included Mainpuri. Mainpuri in the state of Uttar Pradesh has long been a stronghold of the Samajwadi Party. It has won it for almost 3 decades. The seat was held by party patriarch Mulayam Singh Yadav. After his death, it went to his daughter-in-law Dimple Yadav. The BJP has never triumphed in Mainpuri, but it made inroads in the 2022 assembly elections. This time, it hopes to fare better. In Madhya Pradesh's Guna, it's a battle to reclaim glory for Jyotiraditya Scindia. Guna has long been synonymous with the Scindia royal family. It's always voted for the royals. Scindia has won the seat from 2002 to 2014 on a Congress ticket. But in 2019, he lost the family bastion. Soon, Scindia switched sides. He joined the BJP and now he aims to win the seat again under a different party. So phase 3 was a crucial one, but voter turnout was below average. Until 7 p.m., there was a 60.6% voter turnout, which is lower than the elections in 2019. 50% of the parliament seats have been decided in the first 3 phases, but 4 more phases of voting remain. The last phase is on the 1st of June and the results will be announced on the 4th of June.
For our last story tonight, let's talk about Tesla, the auto giant. This company has given the world a masterclass on speedy innovation and on headline-grabbing moves. But now it is teaching us something else, on how not to fire people. Tesla is in a spot financially. They've seen their worst performance in years. Sales are dropping. Profits are down 55% year on year. The demand for EVs is waning globally. So Tesla is downsizing. They're laying off 10% of their global workforce. That's almost 14,000 jobs. This move began in April and now the bloodbath has entered its 4th week. Several workers received termination notices last weekend. And I say notices because that's all that they got. The termination emails began with "Dear employee," not the name of the person. And notice the impersonal language used in the email. This company is worth $578 billion. As of April, they employed 140,000 people, yet they cannot figure out how to write an email. This is better than a child's notice writing homework. Former employees are shocked. Many are taking to social media and sharing how their association with Tesla was snapped with a single mail. But the thing is, it's not just about the termination. People saw this coming. Teams were slimming down week after week. People knew that they could get axed. What stands out here is the egregious way in which Tesla is laying off its employees. Workers had their logins frozen. So termination letters were sent over personal emails. Many found out that they were fired only after security did not let them enter the office building. It can be traumatic. But it's also part of a growing trend. We are only 4 months into 2024. Reports say more than 600,000 employees have been fired globally. Mass layoffs have become the new normal. What's unusual is how they're happening. This year, ed-tech company Byju's fired 500 employees over phone calls and emails. Last year, Google's parent company Alphabet laid off around 12,000 people. Many who worked for the company for decades got the news in their inboxes. The year before that, Meta fired nearly 11,000 employees. For many, again, it happened over email, and this is happening across industries. People are being laid off online. But the sting is real and personal. Companies claim that this is the only efficient way to fire a lot of people at once. Informing workers personally is too risky and complicated. They say employees can access internal systems and go on a sabotage spree. Or it could be difficult to coordinate multiple terminations, but both the reasons seem hollow. Legally, companies have recourse if employees sabotage them. Plus, these workers need to find jobs again. Will they really go around behaving criminally? As for the complications, managers interact with their teams daily. Why does that suddenly become impossible when it is time to lay them off? No matter the explanation, firing people over emails is an unnecessary and cruel act, kind of like breaking up over text, completely avoiding human contact. It serves only one purpose. It lets managers off the hook. They don't have to face the shock. They don't need to console anyone. They don't even have to get criticized. It's all very convenient, but sometimes it can backfire. It can endanger a company's own interests and reputation because word spreads fast. Future hiring prospects read workplace reviews. Some workers publicly post about getting fired, plus they notice the irony. Employees are pushed to give their jobs their all. Many are expected to give up any semblance of personal life. Work is treated as worship, but more often than not, this is a one-sided relationship. Employees are treated as disposable units. It is dehumanizing. The thing is that there is no perfect way to fire someone. No matter how workers get laid off, it will hurt them. But at least when a manager sits in front of them, shows sincerity and empathy, it can make the process more tolerable. Laying off people is going to be brutal either way, but it doesn't have to be undignified. And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. In New York, hummingbirds and flowing saris take over the red carpet at the Met Gala as stars try to make a mark at fashion's biggest night. In Normandy, bunkers get a new lease of life with artworks and frescoes. And a UK zoo welcomes its first baby camel in over 8 years. Finally, we're taking you back in history. On this day in 1945, Nazi Germany officially surrendered to the Allies. It ended the Second World War in Europe. A few months later, in September, Japan also surrendered, thus bringing an end to 6 years of fighting. We're leaving you on that note. Thanks for watching. We will see you tomorrow.
Ripest come to fall from the Nazi tree. Hermann Goethe's chief Nazi criminal will deceive ceasefire. Deputy governor in Poland, 19...
reports from the world's second largest continent. Hello, I'm Alison Lagrange. A very warm welcome from Durban, South Africa. We get you the news and the newsmakers from Africa. South Africa goes to the polls on the 29th of May. I will track the election and bring you ground reports. Is it the end of the road for the African National Congress? And will former President Jacob Zuma stage a dramatic comeback? From elections to climate change, to innovations and opportunities. As the world's attention shifts, we report from Africa, the heart of the global South. Join me every weekday live on Firstpost.
I do think, as someone who doesn't understand a damn thing about it, that it has enormous potential for good and enormous potential for harm, and I just don't know how that plays out.